The Law and You, a look at laws in St. Vincent and the Grenadines which affect our daily lives. The Law and You, presented by lawyer panel P.R Campbell QC and brought to you on SVG-TV as a public service.
Ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, boys and girls, greetings. Welcome to another presentation in this public service nation-building series, The Law and You. This is program number 905, coming to you on Monday the 16th of July 2018. On this program, I will speak to you on the topic sentencing. But before getting into the topic, rather a lot of preliminaries tonight. Firstly, and as usual, I would like to send out my deepest condolences to all families which have suffered recent bereavements. And let me mention the family of the late Sister Ralph, sister of Dr. the Reverend Phyllis Ralph Brown, and to the Williams family, and in particular to His Lordship, the Honorable Colin Williams, who lost his brother Grantley Williams. Grantley was well known to me. He was one of the commissioners serving on the CRC, the Constitutional Review Commission, and we worked together very closely for 6 years on that commission. Very intelligent, steadfast person, less flamboyant than his older brother, it must be said. My deepest sympathy to the entire family. Now, I have worn my dashiki on this program in keeping with the request from high authorities abroad that we celebrate Wednesday the 18th of July by wearing African apparel where possible in honor of the birth of our dearly beloved brother Nelson Mandela. Had he lived, he would have been 100 years Wednesday this week, the 18th of July. And as most of you would know, a week of activities has been arranged to commemorate the Mandela Centennial. Two of the activities, well, one would have been completed yesterday, namely the relay and the concert. And as you hear me now on SVG-TV, the other function is going on in that a memorial lecture is being delivered by the Honorable Luke Brown, Minister of Health. The topic is renewing the Mandela legacy and promoting active citizenship in a changing world. And that would have started at 7 o'clock earlier this evening at French's house. And knowing Mr. Luke Brown, the Honorable Luke Brown, as much as I do, I am sure it would be a very scholarly presentation. And I would hope, without even knowing of its contents, and I unfortunately would not be able to be present, but I would hope that the Honorable Gentleman would see it fit to have the text of his lecture published in one of the weekly newspapers, as he does from time to time. And then on Tuesday evening, a very special occasion. There'll be radio and television interviews during the day. And on Tuesday evening at the Russell Cinema, there would be a viewing of the film Invictus for a modest contribution of $5. The viewing will begin at 6 o'clock in the evening according to the invitation that I have received. Now, Invictus is not a film on the whole life of President Nelson Mandela, but it focuses on the role he played in inspiring the South African rugby team to win the World Cup. The role of Nelson Mandela is played by Mr. Morgan Freeman. Now, most of us who have ever seen films, especially recently, have seen at least one film starring Morgan Freeman. And I happen to have seen Invictus years ago. And it is a masterful film, and the piece of acting put on by the brother, to my mind, was worthy of an Oscar. And you know, Morgan Freeman, he went out of his way to portray Nelson Mandela in such convincing manner that I would want to see the film again. I wouldn't be able to make it on Tuesday night, but I certainly will try and get hold of that film. So I urge anybody who has the opportunity to go and see Invictus and see the man Nelson Mandela brought to life by Morgan Freeman. Beautiful piece of acting. And of course, Wednesday is the day when that's the very birthday, that's when people are supposed to dress up in African apparel. And then on Friday, there will be a recognition ceremony, mural painting, and dress day for starting at 10, put on by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Now, I don't have to remind you of what Nelson Mandela means to me. So much so that when Mrs. Campbell and I were expecting our fourth child in early 1987, and Mandela was still in prison, we decided to dedicate that child to Nelson Mandela. He was far from being president because nobody dreamt that, first of all, he would be released from prison, even though many of us in our student days had agitated for his early release. But we didn't dare dream that he would have been released and that he would live to contest the presidency of the Republic of South Africa and win the presidency and serve as president of South Africa. But he meant so much to me, and his role in the struggle for black liberation meant so much to me that my wife and I decided to dedicate that child to Nelson Mandela. And we said, whether boy or girl, the name would be Mandela. It so happened that the child turned out to have been a girl, and that is why you now know Miss Mandela Campbell. What we spelled, we took the liberty of changing the spelling. We feminized the word Mandela. So her Mandela is spelled M-A-N-D-E-L-L-A. And she was born in 1987, while the person after whom she was named was still serving a prison term. But you know the history, so let me not go into that. Now, next preliminary. I would like to take, and I better hurry up, I would like to take the opportunity to welcome the Court of Appeal of the Eastern and Caribbean Supreme Court to its St. Vincent and the Grenadines sitting, which commenced this morning at the courthouse in Kingstown and will continue throughout the week. It is always a pleasure to have the members of the Court of Appeal here. They only come to St. Vincent 3 times a year, and we do look forward to their visits. Then an extremely important event is going to take place here on Friday. And at the risk of lengthening the preliminaries, I beg you to bear with me, because at 1 o'clock Friday afternoon, initially we had told 9 o'clock in the morning, but the latest information I received says that at 1 o'clock on Friday the 20th, for the very first time in its history, the Caribbean Court of Justice will hold a sitting in St. Vincent. But it will be a ceremonial sitting. Remember, even though we are not participant in the appellate jurisdiction of the Caribbean CCJ, yet it is our court because all the countries of CARICOM accede to the original jurisdiction of the CCJ. That is the court to which we will take disputes involving the Treaty of Chaguaramas. But when it sits here on Friday, it will be the first time the CCJ would be sitting in St. Vincent and Grenadines, and to me, of great significance will be the fact that the president of the CCJ, recently installed as president on the 4th of July, is none other than a Vincentian jurist, Mr. Justice Adrian Saunders, one of us. He will be presiding over the court, and an invitation has been extended. The court will be sitting upstairs the House of Assembly, upstairs the courthouse, as it were. And the ceremony begins at 1, and there will be addresses made in honor of the Honorable Mr. President Adrian Dudley Saunders, an event for which Vincentians should feel immense pride. A son of the soil, one of us. So those who can make it out of the courthouse on Friday afternoon, make it out. Some of us have been invited to deliver brief addresses, and I really look forward to saying my few words on that occasion. Excuse me. Well, the program time is nearly finished, but I really must at least congratulate the nation of Russia on having staged a magnificent World Cup, and what a World Cup it has been. To those of us who follow international football, results beyond our imagination. One by one, the favorite teams fell by the wayside until it boiled down to Croatia making its first appearance in the World Cup finals, and of course, the nation of France. Well, that match was something else. 6 goals, 4 for France, 2 for Croatia. But remarkable goals, including especially the one where the French goalie made a bad blunder. Instead of clearing the ball that was passed back to him, tried to beat the Croatian forward, only to see the ball going in the back of the net. I had to laugh. But all the big names that people were expecting before, Messi, Ronaldo, this and that, Suarez, fell by the wayside. Congratulations to France and to the young team, especially Mbappe, who scored that lovely goal, and I was so glad for Pogba. because when he was purchased by Manchester United, a lot of people had to say that they wasted their money on him and he wasn't performing. He scored a spectacular goal in the World Cup final, silencing his critics. Okay, well, I probably should simply end the program here. Anyway, sentencing at long last. And we're probably exactly halfway through the program, 10 minutes left. Okay, now, sentencing is the process by which judges and the magistrates, and indeed the president of the family court, decide what punishment to impose on someone who has been found guilty of an offense against the laws or who has pleaded guilty to having committed an offense against the laws of the land. Occasionally there's a hue and cry. People would say, oh, that sentence that person got was too light for the offense of which he had been committed. You seldom hear people quarrel and saying the sentence was too heavy. But usually, what do you see? He only get 15 months for that. Now, when a presiding officer, be it a judge or a magistrate or the president of the family court, sits down to hand down a sentence, a punishment on a convicted offender, he or she doesn't scratch his or her head and say, look, I wonder how much I should give him, and then just come up and guess a figure and say, okay, I'm giving you 2 years for that, as if it's a guesswork matter. No. You see, our judicial officers at all levels are trained and they know what they're doing. Not only that, but they have to operate according to rules which have been laid down for them by their superiors. Those rules are called sentencing guidelines. So they are not free to do what they feel like when a person has been convicted and has come up for sentencing. Because over the years, those in authority have evolved certain principles which must be followed by judicial functionaries in imposing sentencing. Sometimes I'm sure a judge might feel like giving somebody a much heavier sentence than he actually does. But a judge is not guided by his emotion. He is guided by guidelines which are laid down for him to follow, him or her. So that whenever you are tempted to say, oh, so-and-so got off too light, that magistrate didn't know what he or she was doing, think again. Because for one thing, you find that the people who criticize most are those who are not in court during the trial. Therefore, people have a tendency to criticize about things they know nothing about. They were not present during the sentencing hearing. And let me come on to that topic right away, sentencing hearing. There was a time when, after a conviction for murder, judges had no choice but to impose the death penalty on the person, because it was thought that that was what the law said. Jury find you guilty of murder, you're sentenced to death. The judge put on a black cloth over his head or her head, as the case may be, and would say words like, stand up, you have been found guilty by a jury of your peers of the crime of murder. I hereby sentence you to death by hanging, and may the Lord have mercy on your soul. Those are the solemn words that used to come out of the mouth of judges at death sentences, at sentences after murder. But in the last few years, those laws have been changed. In the case of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, not by Parliament. The laws have been changed by the Privy Council. In fact, our Court of Appeal took the lead, and the Privy Council evolved the principle that there will be no more automatic sentencing for death after murder cases, after convictions for murder. What has replaced the automatic death sentence? Well, the higher courts have ruled that if a jury brings in a verdict of guilty of murder, the judge has to have a sentencing hearing on another occasion, not the same date on which the jury brings in its guilty verdict. The judge has to adjourn the case for sentencing at a later time. During that time, psychiatric reports are normally ordered on the convicted person to make sure that you're not going to impose a death sentence on a man who is mentally defective. Then at the sentencing hearing, the judge will hear evidence as to the man's mental condition, evidence in mitigation or in aggravation, as the case may be, where the prosecution will put forward certain reasons why they think the death penalty should be imposed, or the prosecution might agree with the defense and say they agree it is not a case where the death penalty should be imposed. And the job of the defense is then easier. But the judge has to go through that sentencing process. And at the end of that process, the judge would have to decide what would be the appropriate penalty for that person who has been convicted of murder. And there the judge has a discretion as to the level of penalty, whether the person should be sentenced to hang, or should be given a term of life imprisonment, or some other term of imprisonment, depending on all the circumstances of the case, including the man's history and antecedents and all the factors dealing with the crime and so on. So the judge is guided by rules which he or she has to follow. Judges cannot automatically sentence somebody to death if they have been found guilty of murder. Now, for lesser offenses, the judge hasn't necessarily got to go through the process of adjourning the matter for sentencing. In many cases, the judges do. And even in the magistrate's court, a person could be found guilty of an offense, and the magistrate say, look, I will adjourn sentencing for another date, and then on that date, hears evidence from prosecution and defense, and decides what to do. But this is something that I want you to understand right now. In most parts of the Commonwealth, there is the so-called 1/3 reduction rule. What does that mean? It means that in most parts of the Commonwealth, a person who pleads guilty of an offense at the earliest opportunity, that is the first time he is brought before the court, if it's an offense to which he is allowed to plead guilty, and he pleads guilty, is entitled to a reduction in the maximum sentence of 1/3. Therefore, if that offense carries a sentence of 15 years imprisonment maximum, for a guilty plea, at the first opportunity, the person is supposed to get 1/3 off, 5 years off. And then you look at other aggravating factors or mitigating factors, as the case may be. Another principle is that first-time offenders are not normally sent to jail unless the circumstances were such that warrant nothing but a custodial sentence. So a person who has never offended before and is committed for the first time would not normally be sent to prison. And if that person has pleaded guilty at the earliest opportunity in any event, he or she will get 1/3 years off the maximum for that offense. Now, these are factors which take place in a court of law. Many of these factors don't come out in the newspaper or in social media, but those are the processes that a judicial officer has to go through. He has to consider the crime that has been committed, the damage it has done to the victim and then to the wider society, and the extent to which you could have a bit of mercy on the person, the circumstances in which the person committed the offense. So that sentencing is not a guessing game. Judicial officers, and by judicial officers, I mean the judges and the magistrates and the president of the family court, are trained in the principles they should use to decide what punishment to give. Those are called sentencing guidelines. So next time you read in the paper that so-and-so got such and such a sentence, the person imposing the sentence would have taken lots of things into consideration that you may not necessarily have read about in the newspapers, okay? And of course, it remains for me to employ one and all not to commit offense, not to get yourself committed. Well, that is all from this program of the Law and You, program 905. I look forward to being a further service to you next week, DV, for another presentation in this public service nation-building series, The Law and You. Don't forget, this is Nelson Mandela's centenary week. Dress up in the African wear, dashikis and whatnot throughout the week. Okay, well, until next time, may the good Lord continue to bless us all.
The Law and You, a look at laws in St. Vincent and the Grenadines which affect our daily lives. The Law and You, presented by lawyer panel P.R Campbell QC and brought to you on SVG-TV as a public service.